You think you've seen crazy stories on the internet. You haven't seen this one. Because what happened to Aqil Fakhr Allen in May 2025 wasn't just a wild animal attack. It was a terrifying lesson about pride control and the brutal reality of nature. This was the moment a man who thought he could tame a lion was proved fatally wrong. And the worst part, he never saw it coming. If you're into real stories that grip your heart and make you question what we think we know about animals, hit that subscribe button for animal stories. We bring you true accounts of powerful animal encounters, sometimes heroic, sometimes horrifying, always unforgettable. Like, subscribe and stay tuned. Aqil Fakhr Allen was a man who believed nature could be reasoned with. At 50 years old, Aqil lived in Kufa, Iraq, a place known more for its mosques and quiet streets than dangerous predators. But behind the high walls of his home, Aqil kept something most people only see at zoos or on wildlife documentaries. He collected exotic animals. Not for profit, not for entertainment, but out of pure obsession. He had monkeys, a python, even a hawk that watched everything with sharp golden eyes from a wooden perch. He kept them all in cages he built himself. Thick glass, reinforced bars, padlocks. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a statement. He wanted the world to know he wasn't afraid of wild things. In fact, Aqil seemed drawn to them. The more dangerous the animal, the more fascinated he became. His neighbors didn't know the full extent of what he kept behind those gates, but they heard things: strange howls at night, the rattle of metal, the occasional deep rumble of something pacing behind stone walls. And they whispered, quietly. Most of them respected him. Some were afraid. A few even admired the way he carried himself: confident, private, untouchable. Then one day everything changed. In early May of 2025, Aqil crossed a line. It wasn't a mistake he made in the heat of the moment. It was something he planned, something he wanted. And it arrived in the back of a covered truck just before sunrise. No sirens, no fanfare, no paperwork. Just a fast, quiet handoff between Aqil and a man whose name has never been made public. Inside that truck was a lion. Not a cub, not a rescued animal in recovery. This was a full-grown male, young, strong, restless, and full of raw, untamed instinct. A lion in every terrifying sense of the word. Aqil had prepared a cage next to his other animals. Thick bars, welded corners, locked doors. It looked secure to the average person. But lions don't measure metal, they measure weakness. And this lion wasn't afraid. It paced, it stared, it waited. Still, Aqil watched it like it was something beautiful, something majestic. He believed, truly believed, that he could tame it. That with enough time, food, and force of will, he could turn a wild predator into something that followed his lead. Maybe even something that trusted him. He was wrong. And the terrifying truth: the lion wasn't. At first it was just noise. Low, deep sounds, more vibration than voice rolling over the stone walls of Aqil's property like distant thunder. They came mostly at night, somewhere between 11 p.m. and dawn. A sound that didn't belong in a neighborhood full of children, stray dogs, and prayer calls echoing from the mosque. It was the lion, and it wasn't happy. Neighbors in the Al-Jamia district of Kufa started noticing changes almost immediately. Mothers began pulling their kids inside earlier than usual. Conversations shifted from idle gossip to tight-lipped concern. They all knew Aqil had strange animals, but this was different. This was a predator. A creature that was clearly too big, too strong, and far too angry to be where it was. One man who lived 3 doors down later told a reporter that the lion's roars felt like a drumbeat in his chest. Another said he considered calling the police but didn't, maybe out of fear. Maybe because Aqil had always seemed like someone you didn't challenge. In private, Aqil continued his routine. He paced the garden paths. He watched the lion from a few feet away. He fed it raw meat with a long pair of tongs through the bars. He even talked to it, whispering commands like he expected it to listen. But the lion wasn't listening. It was pacing nonstop. Back and forth, back and forth. Sharp turns, sudden stops. Ears twitching, eyes tracking every movement. Its muscles were tight like coiled rope, and every inch of its body radiated tension. The cage didn't calm it. The food didn't soothe it. If anything, it seemed to grow more agitated by the hour. Some neighbors began to suspect it wasn't being fed properly. Others thought the cage was too small, too hot, too exposed. Whether they were right or not didn't really matter because the lion wasn't a pet. It wasn't there to be understood. It was there against every law of instinct it had, and it knew it. Inside that cage, the wild didn't die. It just simmered, quiet, dangerous, and waiting. Aqil, on the other hand, remained convinced. He believed the lion would adjust. That dominance would equal respect. He'd studied animals his whole life. He'd handled pythons, hawks, and monkeys. What made this lion any different? Everything. Because unlike the others, this animal had been built for one purpose: to rule its domain by force. It didn't form bonds. It didn't submit. It didn't play games. And above all, it didn't forget what it was. And yet Aqil didn't listen to the warnings. One of his cousins reportedly begged him to reinforce the cage. Aqil waved it off. A friend tried to convince him to bring in a trained handler or vet. Aqil laughed. "It's just about trust," he said. "You respect the animal and it'll respect you." But the lion wasn't seeking respect. It was seeking a way out. By the end of the first week, even the local children could sense something was wrong. One kid who lived across the street said he used to peek through the fence slats until the lion turned and locked eyes with him. He didn't go near that side of the yard again. Something was building, something heavy and silent. And one morning, just as the city began to stretch awake under the May sun, that something finally snapped. It was a Friday morning, May 9th, 2025. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rooftops of Kufa, casting long, golden streaks across the quiet Al Jamia neighborhood. Birds chirped from telephone wires. A fruit vendor rolled his cart out to the corner. Life was slow, ordinary. But behind one set of high concrete walls, something extraordinary and horrifying was about to happen. At around 7:30 a.m., Aqil stepped into his garden, wearing a plain beige shirt, light cotton trousers, and sandals. No gloves, no tranquilizers, no protective gear, no one with him. Not even a phone in his hand. Just him and the lion. To him, this wasn't reckless. It was routine. He'd entered the lion's cage a few times before. Brief moments, simple feedings, calm behavior. He believed the lion had started to recognize him, even respect him. Maybe that morning he thought it was time to take the next step, to go in without fear, without hesitation. Because that's what he believed mattered most: dominance. Show no fear and the animal won't challenge you. He was wrong. As Aqil approached the enclosure, the lion stood still, its golden fur glowing faintly in the sunlight. Its eyes followed his every move, unblinking, focused. It didn't growl. It didn't pace. It just watched. That was the first sign. Aqil opened the gate, slowly stepped inside, and closed it behind him. That was the last. In a blur of muscle, claws, and teeth, the lion lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, far faster than any human could react. The first blow knocked Aqil flat. The second crushed his throat. The third tore into his shoulder and chest, ripping flesh from bone. He tried to scream, but all that came out was a strangled gurgle. Blood gushed from his neck and soaked into the dry earth. The lion pinned him down, its full weight pressing into his body, claws digging in deep. It wasn't a flurry, it was surgical, targeted, ruthless. Aqil had no time to fight back, no time to crawl, no time to plead. To the lion, he wasn't a master. He was prey. The sound of the struggle, snapping bone, muffled cries, the low growl of dominance echoed across the neighborhood. A neighbor later said she thought someone was being butchered. Another said it sounded like someone being torn apart by a machine. They weren't wrong. By the time someone reached the front gate, it was too late. The garden was quiet, too quiet. The lion stood over Aqil's body, its muzzle slick with blood, chest heaving. It didn't snarl or pace. It just stayed there, still, alert. And Aqil, it wasn't moving. His shirt was shredded. His chest was caved in. His neck had been ripped open. Bits of clothing and flesh lay scattered across the dirt like confetti from a nightmare. But the most horrifying part, the lion wasn't finished. It had already started feeding. The screams came next, sharp, desperate, and inhuman. They cut through the early morning air like a siren. One neighbor, an older man sipping tea by his window, dropped his cup when he heard it. Another woman across the street froze mid-step as her young daughter clutched her leg and whispered, "Mommy, is someone dying?" Within minutes, people were pouring into the narrow street in front of Aqil's house. Some stood barefoot, others in pajamas. Nobody really understood what was happening, only that it sounded bad. Really bad. Then someone shouted, "It's the lion! The lion's got him!" Panic spread instantly. The gate to Aqil's compound had been left unlocked, maybe in the chaos, maybe because Aqil never believed he'd need it closed. Either way, it swung open freely as a relative of Aqil, reportedly his nephew, charged through. He sprinted across the stone path toward the garden. What he saw stopped him cold. The lion, massive, blood-soaked and breathing heavily, was crouched over Aqil's body. Its jaws were still locked around the man's torso. There was no movement from Aqil. His body was torn lifeless and barely recognizable. His neck looked like it had been ripped open. His chest was caved in. A trail of blood stretched behind him, marking where he'd been dragged. And the lion wasn't snarling. It wasn't pacing. It was still, like it was protecting Aqil. The man didn't pause. He raised the rifle in his hands, a Kalashnikov that had likely been kept in the house for emergencies, and aimed. One breath, 1 second. He pulled the trigger. The first shot hit, then another, then 5 more. 7 rounds total tore into the lion's body. The beast roared once, loud, furious, guttural, and then collapsed beside Aqil with a heavy thud. The ground shook. Dust rose. Silence followed. But even in death, the lion didn't let go. Its enormous paws remained draped over Aqil's mangled body. Its head, now lifeless, rested against the man's side. It looked less like an attack and more like a warning frozen in time. Minutes later, emergency responders arrived, too late for anything but recovery. They didn't need a pulse check. Aqil's remains were gently loaded into a body bag, the stretcher wheels creaking across the blood-stained ground. The lion's body was covered with a tarp, but not before photos were taken. The scene was documented, evidence collected. It didn't feel real. In a neighborhood known for slow mornings and peaceful prayers, this felt like a nightmare ripped out of a horror film. But it wasn't fiction. It wasn't rumor. It was very real and very avoidable. Aqil's body was taken to Al Sadr Medical City Hospital in Najaf. The doctors confirmed what most already knew: catastrophic injuries to the neck, chest, and shoulder. He hadn't just been killed. He'd been eaten. The story spread fast. First among locals, then across news stations, and then online. Within hours, images and whispers became headlines. Videos from nearby rooftops and blurred cell phone clips started circulating. The internet did what it always does: it lit the match. People were horrified, but they were also angry. How had this happened? How had a fully grown lion ended up in a suburban backyard? And more urgently, who let it happen? The blood on the garden floor had barely dried when the first video leaked. It wasn't from a news crew. It came from a neighbor, just someone with a smartphone and shaking hands filming from a rooftop. The footage was blurry, but the image was unmistakable. A lifeless lion stretched across the dirt soaked in blood. A twisted fence, a broken cage door, and just feet away the motionless remains of Aqil Fakhr Alan. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit. People weren't just sharing it, they were reacting to it with horror, outrage, disbelief. Some couldn't believe what they were seeing. Others refused to watch, but many did, and what they saw left a permanent mark. The hashtags came fast. Justice for the lion, ban exotic pets. This was preventable. From local communities in Iraq to animal rights groups in New York and London, the conversation exploded. And the questions came flooding in. Why was a lion in someone's backyard? Who sold it to him? Where were the regulations? How many more wild animals are living behind fences we can't see? Local Iraqi authorities were suddenly facing a storm of criticism. Journalists dug deeper. According to early investigations, Aqil had acquired the lion through unofficial channels, black market dealers with no accountability, no legal permits, no wildlife oversight, just cash, a handshake, and silence. He hadn't registered the animal. He hadn't consulted a vet. He hadn't even notified local officials. It was all done quietly, illegally, and then it ended violently. One anonymous official called the entire event a disaster waiting to happen. The media agreed. Headlines across the region screamed about recklessness, broken laws, and the illusion of control. And once international press caught wind, the tragedy in Kufa was no longer just a local story, it had become a global scandal. Animal welfare organizations were among the loudest voices. They condemned the incident as a textbook failure of regulation. PETA Middle East released a statement calling the case another preventable death caused by the arrogance of man. And yet not everyone was on the same side. A smaller but vocal group of Aqil's supporters pushed back online. They said he wasn't a monster, that he loved animals, that he didn't deserve what happened. Some even claimed the lion had been acting out of stress, not aggression. But that argument didn't last long. Because the truth was undeniable, Aqil had no business owning that lion. Not in a quiet neighborhood, not without permits, not without understanding what that animal really was. And slowly the world began to agree on one thing: this wasn't just about a man who died. This was about a system that allowed it to happen. The footage sparked debates in cafes, classrooms, and TV studios. In the US, animal behaviorists were invited onto morning shows. In Europe, wildlife sanctuaries used the story to highlight why wild animals don't belong in private homes. In the Middle East, the story became a lightning rod for larger conversations about unregulated animal trade. Everyone had an opinion, but almost no one thought what Aqil did was safe. As more details emerged, it became clear this wasn't a one-off tragedy. This was a warning, a mirror held up to a world that keeps forgetting what the word wild really means. By the time experts started speaking out, the world was already watching. Wildlife specialists, conservationists, former zookeepers, people who had spent decades studying animal behavior, stepped in to explain what had happened, and more importantly, why it was never going to end any other way. One biologist put it bluntly on international television: lions are apex predators. You don't tame them. You don't negotiate with them. You just survive around them if you're lucky. They cited example after example. In South Africa, a man who had raised lions from birth was killed while feeding them. In the Czech Republic, a private owner was mauled in his backyard after years of bonding with his lion. In the US, similar tragedies unfolded in basements, barns, and behind suburban fences, people buying tigers and cougars off the internet, thinking love and discipline were enough. They weren't, because when it comes to wild animals, love doesn't override instinct. Aqil's death, they said, wasn't an accident. It was inevitable. And the truth stung. For all the cages, the cameras, the training attempts, humans keep making the same mistake, thinking that nature owes us something in return. Respect, obedience, loyalty, as if a lion could be reasoned with like a dog. But wild doesn't work that way. In those final seconds, Aqil face down in the dirt body, torn open, strength gone, the illusion shattered. The man who believed he could build trust with a killer instinct realized too late that trust had never been part of the equation. The lion didn't betray him. It was never tamed to begin with. The silence that followed Aqil's death was heavy. His garden, once filled with the sounds of exotic animals, stood quiet. The cage where the lion had lived now sat empty. Just rusted bars, dried blood, and a haunting memory of what should never have happened. But the silence didn't last long. Because the story had become more than just one man and one animal. It had become a wake-up call, a challenge to laws, to culture, to the growing fantasy that any wild creature can be owned, confined, and commanded without consequence. And in that wake, a deeper question emerged. Where do we draw the line? Should lions, tigers, and other predators ever be kept as pets? Should private ownership of exotic animals be banned entirely? Or are we willing to risk more blood, more stories like Aqil's just to prove we're in control? These aren't easy questions, but they're necessary. Because this wasn't a horror movie. It wasn't a fable. It was real, and it can happen again. And the lion, it didn't hate Aqil. It didn't plan revenge. It just remembered what it was. Nature never signed the deal. And when pushed too far, it takes back control. Thanks for watching this story on Animal Stories. We know this one was hard to hear, but sometimes the most painful truths are the ones we can't ignore. What do you think? Should exotic pets like lions be banned completely? Do you think tragedies like this will keep happening if we don't change the laws? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. And if this story made you stop and think, give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone who still thinks they can tame the wild. We'll see you in the next story. Stay safe and stay respectful of the wild.